Welcome, 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 everyone. This evening, we commemorate the centenary of the ascension of Abdu'l-Bahá with the second of our PG town hall meetings. We have a wonderful program of stories, writings, prayers, and songs, and we welcome you to share yours with us. This November, the world will commemorate the 100th anniversary of the passing of Abdu'l-Bahá. The Universal House of Justice has given us a bounteous glimmering of their planning. Our team has been consulting about local efforts that can help us prepare day by day for that anniversary. Each of us can make a personal commitment to learn more about Abdu'l-Bahá. We can practice telling favorite stories about Abdu'l-Bahá's life and then share them with friends. We can incorporate stories and writings of Abdu'l-Bahá into our core activities. We can invite friends to town hall style gatherings where participants can share writings and life stories of Abdu'l-Bahá. Tonight, we will open with a prepared program of stories and writings from Abdu'l-Bahá's arrival in Baghdad in 1853 to his departure at Ridvan in 1863. Attendees are then invited to share stories and quotes. They can be from other years and other authors, but should help us better understand Abdu'l-Bahá. Your amount of time will depend on the number of participants. This is an opportunity to practice telling a story from memory.
O thou compassionate Lord, thou who art generous and able, we are servants of thine sheltered beneath thy providence. Cast thy glance of favor upon us. Give light to our eyes, hearing to our ears, and understanding and love to our hearts. Render our souls joyous and happy through thy glad tidings. O Lord, point out to us the pathway of thy kingdom and resuscitate all of us through the breath of the Holy Spirit. Bestow upon us life everlasting and confer upon us never-ending honor. Unify mankind and illumine the world of humanity. May we all follow thy pathway, long for thy good pleasure, and seek the mysteries of thy kingdom. O God, unite us and connect our hearts with thy indissoluble bond. Verily, thou art the giver, thou art the kind one, and thou art the Almighty. Abdu'l-Bahá.
In a little bit, we will turn to the stories about Abdu'l-Bahá in Persia, but first, we're going to look at what was going on in the United States in the years 1850 to 1865, especially relating to people of African heritage. The Third Great Awakening, religious revival beginning in the 1850s, was characterized by new church denominations, active missionary work, and a commitment to personal morality versus ritual and doctrine. In the decade of the 50s, US was seeing tensions over the institution of slavery becoming prominent, and events were leading toward the Civil War. For instance, in 1850, the fugitive slave law was established, honoring the rights of enslavers, and some states responded by passing laws honoring the rights of enslaved or formerly enslaved people. In 1852, Harriet Beecher Stowe published her novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin, depicting the harsh conditions for enslaved African Americans. And Frederick Douglass delivered his speech, The Meaning of July 4th for the Negro in 1852. And I'll read just a few words from that famous speech. It begins, "What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days of the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is a constant victim." In 1855, a man named Langston becomes the first African-American elected to serve in the United States Congress from Ohio. 1857, the Supreme Court announces the Dred Scott decision, which finds that Black people cannot be American citizens, inflaming the debate over enslavement. 1858, Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas hold debates in Illinois where they're both running for Senate. Douglas wins the election, but the debates make Lincoln famous nationally for his anti-slavery views. 1859, white abolitionist John Brown tries to start an uprising of enslaved people, but it was a failure. The same year, the last ship to transport enslaved people arrives in the US, in Alabama. In 1860, South Carolina responds to the election of Abraham Lincoln as president by seceding from the Union, the first state to do so. On the map, you see the green states are the Confederacy, the pink states are the Union, the brown areas are territories. They're not yet states. 1861, the Civil War begins. 1862, President Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation declaring that on January 1st of 1863, all slaves would be freed. 1865, the Civil War ends after 4 years, and 5 days later, Abraham Lincoln is assassinated in Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C.
Meanwhile, in Persia, the years of persecution and massacre had taken a terrible toll on the Babi community. The Bab himself had seen the flower of his following perish before he went to his own death in 1850, his breast the target of 750 bullets. Then, in 1852, an attempt on the life of the Shah had unleashed a tide of persecution fiercer than any the Babi community had previously experienced. It swept away every one of the leading followers of the Bab, all except Bahá'u'lláh. While he lay in chains and fetters in the Siyah Chal, a dungeon in Tehran, there was no one to whom the agonized and bewildered Babis could turn for guidance and reassurance. They were plunged into what seemed an unfathomable abyss of darkness and despair. In Qazvin, the hometown of Tahirih, 4 separate groups of Babis argued with each other and occupied themselves with absurd fancies and doctrines. Nabil al-Azam, a historian traveling in Khorasan province, where the light of the new faith had blazed so brightly before, wrote, "The fire of the cause of God had been well nigh quenched in every place. I could detect no trace of warmth anywhere. In banishing Bahá'u'lláh, the Shah fondly imagined that he had dealt a final blow to the Babi movement and that he had destroyed any possibility of its revival in his dominion. But he was mistaken. Though Baha'u'llah's body bore the scars of imprisonment, though he was so weak and ill that it seemed scarcely possible that he would survive the rigors of the long journey to Baghdad, in his heart there surged an ocean of beauty, might, and power. He alone, amongst the Babis, knew that the darkened embers of their faith would blaze up again in another land in unimaginable brightness."
Yes.
The 70 exiles who left Tehran on a bitter winter morning in 1953 consists of Bahá'u'llah's family, his two brothers, Mirza Musa and Mirza Muhammad Kuli, together with their wives, their young children, and a number of servants. They were escorted supposedly escorted by government officials. 3 months and 500 miles of exhausting travel now lay ahead over bleak terrain and through mountains passes in cold, which Baha'u'lláh himself described as so intense that one cannot even speak, and ice and snow so abundant that it is impossible to move. This was Abdu'l-Bahá's first departure from his homeland. He was never to return. Abdu'l-Bahá's sister, Bahia Hanum, later related, "My father was very ill. The chains has left his neck galled, raw, and much swollen. My mother, who was pregnant, was unaccustomed to hardships and was worried and harassed over our recent trials and the uncertainty of our fate. We were all insufficiently clothed and suffered keenly from exposure. My brother, in particular, was very thinly clad. Riding upon a horse, his feet, ankle, hands, and wrists were much exposed to the cold, which was so severe that they became frostbitten and swollen and caused him great pain. The effect of those frostbites Abdu'l-Bahá was to feel for the rest of his life. In April 1853, exhausted, the exiles reached Baghdad. We arrived in Baghdad, Bahia Hanum recalled, in a state of great misery and also of almost utter destitute. My father was still very ill. My mother and other women in delicate health. Small children needed care, while our means were insufficient to procure usual necessities. Asiya Hanum, Abdu'l-Bahá's mother, had managed to arrange, before leaving Tehran, for a few valuable items from her dowry, which had escaped the pillaging of their house, to be sold. The money sent to Baghdad from the sale of those items enabled the exiles eventually to purchase the very basic necessity of life. Abdu'l-Bahá had left Tehran still suffering from tuberculosis. Remarkably, though, in spite of this serious illness and despite the ordeal of the winter journey, once in Baghdad, suddenly, and against the opinion of the doctors who had pronounced his condition incurable, he made a full recovery.
When Abdu'l-Bahá was 9 or 10, he recognized his father as him whom God shall make manifest. Sometime during this first year in Baghdad is when he did it. His own spiritual insights into the meaning of the mystery that had occurred in the Sea of Chal were that the angel Gabriel had spoken to Baha'u'lláh and revealed to him that he was the promised one of all religions and he whom God shall make manifest as foretold by the Bab. We have a reading from Hand of the Cause, Hassan Balyuzi, of this event. The Bab states that the first one to believe in a manifestation of God is the essence of the achievements of the preceding dispensation. And so Abdu'l-Bahá, the first to believe with his whole being in the mission of his father, was the most eminent representative of the virtues called forth by the Bab. This basically means that Abdu'l-Bahá had absorbed and understood in its entirety the Bab's mission, words of scripture, and his purpose. And he had added all the qualities he had learned from the Bab to his own special character. And then some 60 years afterwards, Abdu'l-Bahá described this moment in which this conviction suddenly overwhelmed his whole nature, as recorded of a diary of Mirza Ahmad Sarab, January 1914. In Abdu'l-Bahā's words, I am the servant of the Blessed Perfection. In Baghdad, I was a child. Then and there, he announced to me the word, and I believed in him. As soon as he proclaimed to me the word, I threw myself at his holy feet and implored and supplicated him to accept my blood as a sacrifice in his pathway. Sacrifice, how sweet I find that word. There is no greater bounty for me than this. What greater glory can I conceive than to see this neck chained for his sake, these feet fettered for his love, this body mutilated or thrown into the depths of the sea for his cause? If in reality we are his sincere lovers, if in reality I am his sincere servant, then I must sacrifice my life, my all, at his blessed threshold. Words of Abdu'l-Bahá.
One early morning, between dawn and sunrise, Mirza Agha Jan was in the street outside Bahá'u'lláh house when Baha'u'lláh emerged from his home. Overwhelming anguish was evident in his features and he spoke in anger. These creatures, Baha'u'lláh pronounced, are the same creatures who for 3,000 years have worshipped idols and bowed down before the golden calf. Now too, they are fit for nothing better. What relation can there be between these people and his who is the countenance of glory? What ties can bind them to the one who is the supreme embodiment of all that is lovable? So powerful was the effect of his appearance and his words on Mirza Agha Jan that he was unable to move. Very early on the morning of 10 April 1854, before anyone else in the house was awake, Baha'u'lláh left Baghdad with one companion. He told no one where he was gone. Already in his young life, Abdu'l-Bahá had experienced bitter persecution, homelessness, and utter impoverishment. But while his beloved father was with them, these things had been bearable. Now, so suddenly, this deprived of one whose mission he alone had fully recognized and without any idea where his father had gone. He was utterly alone. The trial brought upon his family by their most difficult house guest, Mirza Yahya, the death of his own infant brother, the constant and ever widening intercourse of Mirza Yahya and Sayyid Muhammad, the responsibility He assumed as head of a household in exile in his father's absence. The acute loneliness and uncertainty of those days and the agony of a second seemingly endless separation from his abhorred father, aged Abdu'l-Bahá, for beyond his years. He confined to Nabil at the time that he felt that he had grown old while still a child. Bahia Khanum later related, my brother was deeply attached to his father. This attachment seemed to strengthen with his growth. After our father's departure, he fell into great sorrow. He would go away by himself and when sought for, be found weeping, often falling into such grief that no one could console him. His chief occupation at this time was copying and committing to memory the tablets of the Bab. The childhood and youth of my brother was, in fact, in all respects unusual. Horseback riding was the only diversion of which he was fond. In that he became proficient. Though desolated by his father's absence in the company of the believers who had immigrated with his family, Abdu'l-Bahá was calm. Mirza Musa took him regularly to the meeting of the friends where his eloquence and wisdom astonished all. It was the strength and consolation that Abdu'l-Bahá found in the writing of the Bab that sustained him. A year and more dragged by Asiya Khanum and Mirza Musa made every possible inquiry, but without result. Abdu'l-Bahá spent many entire nights in earnest prayer. On one occasion, he prayed the whole night a certain prayer with the one intention that our Father might be restored to us. This prayer was Ya Allahul Mustaqas, Ya Allahul Mustaqas, is an invocation revealed by the Bab. He prescribed it for recitation by his followers in times of trouble and difficulty. Shoghi Afandi translated the word Mustaqas as he who is invoked for help. very next day, he and our uncle, Mirza Musa, overheard two people speaking of a marvelous one living as a dervish in the wild mountain district of Soleimaniye. They described him as the nameless one who had magnetized the countryside with his love. And they immediately knew that must be our beloved. It was at the request of Abdu'l-Bahá and Mirza Musa that Sheikh Sultan and Jawad, the woodcutter, at once set out for the mountains to search for the dervish. Sheikh Sultan was a devoted Babi who had learned of the new faith through Tahir. He had no ties in Baghdad and told Asiya Khanum and her children that he desired no greater happiness than to be allowed to seek for him whom all loved so much, and that he would not return without Baha'u'lláh. He was, however, Baha'i Khanum related, very poor, not being able even to provide a donkey for the journey. And he was, besides, no very strong and therefore not able to go on foot. We had no money for the purpose, nor anything of value by the sale of which money could be obtained. So, with the exception of a single rock upon which we all slept, this we sold, and with the proceeds bought a donkey for this friend, who thereupon set out upon the search. Time passed. We heard nothing and fell into the deepest dejection and despair. Finally, 4 months having elapsed since our friends had departed, a message was one day received from him saying that he would bring my father home on the next day. The other members of the family could not credit the truth of this news, but it seems to electrify my brother. He questioned and examined the messenger in detail and became much excited. He believed that his father would return, but no one else did. During the night following the next day, however, my father walked into the house. We hardly knew him. His beard and hair were long and matted. He really was a dervish in appearance. The meeting between my brother and his father was the most touching sight I have ever seen. Abdu'l-Bahá threw himself on the floor before him and kissed and embraced his feet, weeping and crying. Why did you leave us? Why did you leave us? While the great uncle Dervish wept over his boy, the son carried a weight not to be expressed in words.
On his return from Kurdistan, Baha'u'lláh began the task of reviving and revitalizing the Babi community, which in his absence had fallen to the uttermost depth of degradation. Baya Hanum relates that the fame he had acquired in the mountains reached Baghdad, and not only Babis, but many others came to hear his teachings, and many also merely out of curiosity to see him. As he wished for retirement, these curiosity seekers were a great trouble and annoyance to him. When Abdu'l-Bahá was 12 years old, he was known as Abbas then. he began managing the crowds who came to see his father. He declared that he would protect his father from such intrusions and that he himself would first see those who come. On his own door, Abbas hung a placard that read, "Those who come for information may apply within. Those who come only because of curiosity had better stay away." On his father's door, he hung another, "Those who are searching for God," it said, "come and come and come." If he found that they were genuine truth seekers, he admitted them to his father's presence. Otherwise, he did not permit them to see him. While Abdu'l-Bahá was in his early teens, Baha'u'lláh began to refer to his eldest son as a master, and it was by this title that he began to be generally referred to amongst the believers in Baghdad. Abdu'l-Bahá's relationship to his father was not merely that of a son who deeply loved his human father. From the time that he recognized Baha'u'lláh as his Lord, the one for whom the Bab had given up life itself, Abdu'l-Bahá manifested in his attitude and in all his actions the utmost humility, respect, and submissiveness towards Baha'u'lláh. In these same years, Baha'u'lláh also bestowed upon Abdu'l-Bahá the title The Mystery of God. In describing Abdu'l-Bahá's role as center of the Baha'i covenant, Adib Taherzadeh writes, Abdu'l-Bahá was created by God for the sole purpose of becoming the recipient of God's revelation in this age. We shall never know his real station because he was the mystery of God, a title conferred upon him by Baha'u'lláh. He was the priceless gift of Baha'u'lláh to mankind.
As was stated that when Baha'u'lláh went to Kurdistan and was a dervish for 2 years, Abdu'l-Bahá started slowly to take on responsibilities for the household. And as he grew to manhood in Baghdad, he had taken on the task of supervising the work, daily routines, purchasing provisions, and making sure that Baha'u'llah's family functioned smoothly. The home you can see in front of you housed 70 people by report. That was Baha'u'llah's family, his servants, and disciples. This house was named by Baha'u'lláh as a pilgrimage place for the Baha'is and is considered a very holy place. In addition to its name of House of Baha'u'lláh in Baghdad, it is also called the Most Great House and the House of God. One might wonder, given the number of members in the holy entourage or the exile party, how they survived financially. We were told that Asiya Hanum had put jewels in her clothes, and that started them off, but we assume or believe that many of the believers and members of Baha'u'llah's family had trades and probably went out into the Baghdad community to do jobs to bring money into the house. Additionally, it is stated that many believers contributed to the House of Baha'u'lláh in Baghdad. In 1860, while Abdu'l-Bahá was learning his duties, his brother Mirza Mehdi came forward from Tehran. He had to stay behind due to illness. When he came, the household was complete. There was great rejoicing. Abdu'l-Bahá was so thrilled to have his brother with him. And like Abdu'l-Bahá, Mirza Mehdi became an ardent follower of Baha'u'lláh to the end of his days. And in Baghdad, he studied Baha'u'llah's writings.
Abdu'l-Bahá, while his father was away in Khorasan, spent a lot of his time transcribing the tablets of the Bab and memorizing them. And he became well known for his handwriting and script. When Baha'u'lláh returned, he had revealed one of his most important theological works, a book called the Book of Certitude, or the Kitab-i-Aqdas in Persian, that is an explanation, an answer to questions that were posed to him by the Bab's maternal uncles. And Abdu'l-Bahá transcribed the book, and an original manuscript still exists in his handwriting in the archives. So that was one of the services that he continued to perform for Baha'u'lláh through the years. He was known not only for his script, but for his wisdom. And as was said, Baha'u'lláh was inundated with requests and demands for his time. And one such request came from a certain Ali Shawkat Pasha, who was a highly cultured and well-educated nobleman. And he was asking a question about the meaning of this famous Islamic tradition ascribed to Muhammad. I was a hidden treasure and loved to be known. Therefore, I created beings to know. And in my research on this, I found a translation of this treatise that he wrote by Mujan Moman. It's a much longer work. I think I saw somewhere where it's over 1,100 words. And so this is just a small excerpt from it, in which he begins to explain the essence of the quote and breaks it down into four main areas of information. So I'll read this now. In the pearl of each word of this divine song and this heavenly melody, there undoubtedly lie hid unnumbered pearls of hidden knowledge, and in the existence of every letter of it, limitless oceans of meaning are concealed. But a sprinkling from that ocean of waves and a drop from that sea may be disseminated on account of the request of friends. And I hope that the explanation of these holy words and heavenly signs may contain the hidden confirmation of the Lord of Might, and that his assistance and unseen mercy may be made manifest. Verily, he is the King, the Helper. In the hidden treasures and storehouses of these heavenly words, the secrets of created things, the cause of the creation of existing things, and the raising up of a contingent being lie concealed. Know, O bird of the flower of divine unity and nightingale of the garden of detachment. He's referring to the Pasha there. What a way to refer to somebody. That in order to comprehend this tradition, I was a hidden treasure and loved to be known. Therefore, I created the creation that I might be known. It is necessary to understand four stations. This tradition is upon the tongues of all people, be they of the generality or of special rank, and is written in all the books and treatises. As for understanding these four stations, the first is the hidden treasure. The second is the stages and stations of love. The third is the station of creation and similar matters. And the fourth is the station of knowledge. And then he goes on in 4 additional sections to explain each of these. And this was found to be so just unusual and full of insight that it astounded the Pasha and all who read it. And it's just an example of the innate wisdom that is part of what made Abdu'l-Bahá the mystery of God.
It was near the end of March in 1863. that as a result of pressure exerted by those antagonistic to Baha'u'lláh in Baghdad, Constantinople, and Tehran, that the Shah's government, eager for removing Baha'u'lláh even further from its borders, persuaded the Ottoman government to invite Baha'u'lláh to move to Constantinople, known today as Istanbul in Turkey. So unwilling was the governor of Baghdad, Namek Pasha, to supervise this removal, that he could not bring himself to meet personally with Baha'u'lláh, but sent his deputy to convey the instructions received from the Ottoman capital. Abdu'l-Bahá and Mirza Musa, acting on Baha'u'llah's instructions, visited this governor, Namek Pasha, and were given a splendid reception. Abdu'l-Bahá wrote of that visit, "Such hath been the interposition of God, that the joy evinced by them, the adversaries, hath been turned to chagrin and sorrow, so much so that the Persian consul general in Baghdad regrets exceedingly the plans and plots the schemers had devised." The news of Baha'u'llah's imminent departure from Baghdad provoked consternation and grief amongst not just his own followers, but also amongst many in the city who had come to know and love him. So many people were coming to this house to pay their respects to him and to his family that his family could not begin the work of packing up their belongings. It was Abdu'l-Bahá who arranged for Baha'u'lláh to move to a garden near the city called Najibiyeh, which later Baha'u'lláh named the Garden of Ridvan, which means the Garden of Paradise, so that his family would be able to prepare for the journey to Constantinople. Abdu'l-Bahá and his brothers were with Baha'u'lláh in the boat that took them across the Tigris to the Garden of Ridvan. Abdu'l-Bahá was also present with a few other believers when Baha'u'lláh declared in that garden that he was the one whose coming the Bab had foretold, the promised one of all religions. This was his first public declaration, 10 years after he was in the dungeon in Tehran, the Siyah Chal, and received a revelation from a maid of heaven who was suspended in the air before him. For the next 12 days, the Baha'u'lláh was in this garden, and on the 9th day, his family came and joined him after they had made preparations, and on the 12th day, Baha'u'lláh left. But these 12 days are celebrated as a festival by Baha'is all over the world. And so we are now in this period of Ridvan, and we have just finished the first day, and we're a few days into the Ridvan festival. We'll celebrate on the 9th day and on the 12th day. Monira Khanum, the wife of Abdu'l-Bahá, shared later on what she had known of the master's early life, of Abdu'l-Bahā's early life. These recollections were reported by Lady Blomfield, and she paraphrased, "Abdu'l-Bahá, well endowed with a peculiar receptiveness that was inborn, and strengthened by the education given to him by his father, saw as in a radiant vision the world of the future, when the divine message, having become known and comprehended by men of goodwill, would change the heart of the world. This insight imparted to Abdu'l-Bahá a fresh measure of joy in the wonder of the new revelation." When the exiles left Baghdad, Abdu'l-Bahá was already 19 years old, and in the words of Hassan Balyuzi, he was handsome, gracious, agile, zealous to serve, firm with the willful, generous to all.
Attendees are now invited to share stories and quotes. They can be from other years and other authors, but should help us better understand Abdu'l-Bahá. Your amount of time will depend on the number of participants. This is an opportunity to practice telling a story from memory.
I remember somebody mentioned this story to me. It talks about Baha'u'lláh was banished and then had a very difficult, their life is difficult. and then also compare what kind of wealth and the wonderful life he had before his imprisonment and the comparison. It says a time that they were so hungry, they don't have money to buy anything. Now his wife is from a very, very wealthy family, had to cut the button of his clothes, which made of gold, and traded it for food. You see how much, what kind of wealth he came from, and then he got banished to the place that was all that hardship. So I was always very remember that story. It was very touching.
Abdu'l-Bahá, during his life, as we know, he traveled just literally halfway around the world to share the teachings of his father. And we have a wonderful book called Paris Talks, and it really illustrates how long he spent in Paris and all of the different groups that he spoke to. But he actually spent a really interesting, just a very interesting time there in terms of attracting people to the Baha'i faith that went on to do some incredible things from that group in France, as well as later in Germany. While he was in Paris, he stayed at an apartment. And if you get a chance to visit Paris, contact the National Center and sign up to go for a tour to that apartment. And there's a caretaker of that apartment that will walk you through, and it's just an incredible deepening in the time that Abdu'l-Bahá spent there. And one of the points that was pointed out on that tour is that in the mornings he would go for a walk in some of the gardens around those apartments. And at the time, there were a lot of constructions that were put up for the World's Fair. And one of those constructions was this very elaborate and over-decorative kind of glass palace with so many windows. And it was just so fancy. And when he walked by there one day, he said, "This is a shrine to the ego of a person," or something to that effect, that it was just, it was not worth much. It was just showy. He said, "It would be better to sweep it away and put up a monument to humanity and human rights." And then he went on with his walk. And today, the spot where that palace is now a world-renowned institution on the study of human rights.
Wow.
Very good.
You can take tours inside the Human Rights Building. It's so big, it looks like one of our Smithsonian institutions. It's huge.
So you're allowed to cheat and read something from vignettes of the life of Abdu'l-Bahá. This is full of just little pearls of information gleaned from various people about Abdu'l-Bahá, and I think a lot of it has to do with when he was in America. And I was just scrolling through quickly, and I found this one that caught my eye. The first person singular seldom crept into the master's speech. He once told a group of New York friends that in the future, the words I and me and mine would be regarded as profane. Louis Getzinger reported that one day she and Georgie Ralston were driving with the master. He closed his eyes and apparently fell asleep. Louis and Georgie talked on, probably about their own concerns, for suddenly the master's eyes sprang open and he laughed. I, me, my, mine. Words of the devil, he said.
Yeah, this story was told from my mom It's about my grandfather, Mr. Dalari Sani Skui. He had permission to go see Baha'u'lláh, but by the time he went there, Baha'u'lláh had passed away. So he had permission to go see Abdu'l-Bahá. When he went there, because of his good handwriting, Abdu'l-Bahá asked for him to stay, and he was transcribing the books, writings of Baha'u'lláh. So he stayed there for a year. One story that he said, one day normally every day they will walk through the streets of Akka, and sometimes they will see the poor people. Abdu'l-Bahá will ask him to give something. And he had money in his pocket every time they pass, and Abdu'l-Bahá says, okay, give it, and he gives. Then at one point he finishes all his money, but he didn't want to say anything. He slipped his ring off his finger to his palm. So when they see another person, then he will give the ring. So by the time they got to another person, Abdu'l-Bahá, before he could give anything, Abdu'l-Bahá tells the man that in Arabic, sorry, we are finished. We don't have money right now. Because then my grandfather put the ring back. But anyway, he was able to also write some of the books for himself in a beautiful silk paper, and he brought it with him. And we were able to get one copy of Hidden Words by his handwriting, but unfortunately they're all they're gone from our house.
When we were in Tabriz, I remember a book we had by his handwriting, Kitab Aqdas, he wrote by handwriting. Yeah,
He transcribed.
Transcribed Arabic is written by very beautiful handwriting.
His name was Mirza Haydar Ali Oskui. This name is popular in the Baha'i books because there's a Haji Mirza Haydar Ali Isfahani.
Isfahani is different from Oskui.
So they have kind of the same name, but they're different people.
And I'm lucky in my family, I remember him. I was maybe 4 years old. My dad took us there, and 5 o'clock in the morning, I will wake up there by his chanting of the long obligatory prayers. It was amazing.
Wow.
Does anyone remember the story of how Abdu'l-Bahá helped his gardener? He was not very happy because there were these insects that were causing quite a bit of trouble. So basically, Abdu'l-Bahá tells the insects that this gardener doesn't want you here. Go on, and he just does something with the hem of his robe, and they all like fly away. They don't disappear. They don't come back.
The third town hall will be May 29th.
Thank you very much.
Baghdad is over.
We are going
to
Constantinople.
We're going to
Leaving town.
Constantinople.
Thank you
Thank you so much. Nice seeing you all.
Nice to
Good
meet you.
night, friends.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Bye, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.
Happy Ridvan.